Good evening, everybody. So yes, that was a little bit of some of the stuff I do. I actually do a lot more than that. But tonight I want to talk about a topic that's very close to my heart, and that is a topic that every environmentalist should by now be well aware of. And I remember from my conservation days when I was studying for nature conservation, take a guess what was recommended. The Silent Spring by Rachel Carson. And the very interesting book, because I found out something the other day that I never realized, because of the backlash expected by the pharmaceutical companies, she had a very, very powerful ally who protected her the whole way through. And that was none other than the President of the United States. In fact, her book sat on his desk in the Oval Office, and JFK firmly believed in Rachel Carson and what she said. Unfortunately, for most people today, the wisdom of Rachel Carson is all but forgotten. So before we even go into the whole rodenticide and the secondary poisoning thing, I put a chart up here. Now, this chart comes from the National Park Service, and it's actually a chart done by Dr. Laurel Serace. Now, Dr. Laurel Serace is an extremely interesting woman. She did a lot of research into mountain lions and bobcats, and her real thing was to find out why mountain lions were dying from a mange. Anyway, to cut the long story short, you can see how the whole food chain works. Yeah, you have the house, people put out poison, rats are poisoned. So your next category of predators in America, this is bobcats, coyote, birds of prey, then eat the poisoned rats. And at the top of the food chain is the mountain lion. But the anticoagulant rodenticide doesn't kill the mountain lion outright. It suppresses its immune system, and then it makes it susceptible to other diseases. So she was able to find out that mountain lion's mange was actually caused by secondary rodenticide poisoning. And this was quite a shock, because when people think of secondary rodenticide poisoning, you don't really expect things like mountain lion, which are really big predators, perfectly capable of killing humans, and they do on a regular basis, that these animals can be affected right up the food chain by something as simple as rodenticide and a poisoned rat. But you know, if you look at the whole big picture in America, for interest, I was very intrigued as to how some of these isolated areas, the mountain lion were actually getting mange. And in discussions with a number of people, what actually happens is there are a lot of illegal marijuana plantations up in the mountains, and they run water pipelines to water the plants. And of course, rodents chew holes in the pipelines to get to the water. And then what happens is they put out rodenticide, and that's how it actually ended up. So now you look at a little infographic here, and you realize that this stuff's going right up to the top of the food chain. But let's get back to little Port Elizabeth, and let's see what's going on here. So being involved with raptors for, I hate to admit it, because I did a little bit of serious thinking, because, you know, like most people, I kind of think I'm like 21 years old, never got much older. But truth of the matter is I was 15 years old, and I went to a friend's farm in the Karoo. And as we stopped the farmhouse, I looked at the laborers' cottages, and in the middle of the land was something flapping. And of course, being a kid who'd always loved and been intrigued by all creatures wild, I rushed over and I found a booted eagle in a gin trap. And for the princely sum of 5 Rand, I bought the booted eagle. And that was my first real experience with raptors. And from then on, throughout my conservation days, I had the unique opportunity, because in those days, we still did real conservation, where you didn't sit behind a desk in front of a computer. You actually got into the real field. And I had the unique privilege of going to many big eagle nest sites and associating with a lot of the then top-notch ornithologists of the day. And it was a fascinating experience for me, and it just intrigued me more and more with these birds. And add to that, I've always had a keen desire and a keen interest in falconry, which I took up. So I've been a falconer since 25, so over 30 years already. So my real love has always been birds of prey, and in particular falcons. And what actually happened is I got drawn into this whole thing, because every person in town that finds an injured bird of prey knows, phone Arnold, bring it to him, bring it to him, bring it to him. And so I ended up a lot of times being pretty well known around town for rehabilitating birds of prey. And the real part of the story happened because a woman phoned me, and she said, listen, I need your help. By then I'd left conservation. I wasn't particularly interested in working for the government anymore. I was trying to go into the tourism industry, but I was not enjoying working with people. I kind of preferred wildlife, but still I didn't want to work for anyone. So she phoned me about 3 or 4 times, and being a persistent kind of person, she came and she grabbed me by the scruff of my neck, took me along and said, listen, this client of mine has a warehouse, and this warehouse is full of rats and pigeons, and you always love birds of prey. You work with birds of prey. By then, funny enough, from the 90s, even my conservation days, I'd already put up a substantial nest box, raptor nest box project around town, and I had quite a few successful raptor nest box sites in that. And so she said, listen, you can find a solution because poison doesn't work. And so I said to her, I said, yeah, okay, what? Get all the poison out, leave it out for about 2 months. I'll put a pair of spotted eagle owls into the warehouse. So needless to say, after 2 months, she came and reminded me again. I took a pair of spotted eagle owls. Kind of funny, like people have bullets. I've got a whole host of spotted eagle owls. Took 2 eagle owls, put them in the warehouse. Within a month, there was no more rodent problem and no more bird problem. And that started to get me really thinking. But at the same time, what is interesting is more and more people started to contact me as well and bring in poison birds. And at that time, which was late 90s, early 2000s, I had a very good vet friend, probably brilliant vet, could have nothing to do with people, but she really was amazing. And she said to me one night, she said, you know, Arnold, she said, when I was in the suburb, every single lamppost had an owl on. Now you just don't see owls anymore. So while we're talking and all of that, I started to realize, but you know, I'm starting to get more and more secondary poisoned owls coming in. And a lot of them died relatively quickly. Some of them took their time about dying, and a few we saved. In fact, the survival rate of those poisoned owls back in those days was probably about 30%. So 30% of the owls that came in were able to save. The rest died. And then more and more people phoned me. As people got to know and they got to realize, well, you know, I've got a real interest in this, more and more people phoned me. And the thing that really worried me is, was I alone in this world in noticing that owls were getting slaughtered by rodenticide at an alarming rate? Now, I'm very methodical when I do things. So when I say an owl died of secondary poisoning, I'm not guessing it. You know, Dr. Matt will tell you, often we'll bring the bird in, we'll do he'll run a couple of tests, we'll look at things, and we'll conclude, okay, this is secondary poisoning. So it's not a guess, you know, this bird died of secondary poisoning. It's a fact that when I say something died of secondary poisoning, it died of secondary poisoning. And the amount became alarming. So if I look at my facts and my figures, I probably get anywhere between 70 and 100 birds of prey in a year, right? And lately, the majority of them are suffering from secondary poisoning. Now, you have to ask yourself, and the sad thing is that myself and the 1 or 2 people that help me, we are virtually like the godparents of owls in the city, because it is frightening how many returns we get on rung birds that we have rehabilitated, released, and they come back again poisoned. Now, this here is a classic example. Now, I put a whole lot of photos here because they're stories, and each photo tells a story, and I feel that these birds deserve to have their story told. If you look carefully at the leg on this female owl, you will notice a saffron. That owl was rehabilitated by me for secondary poisoning, released. 2 years later, I got a phone call from a local golf course, and they said, look, there's a dead owl lying next to 2 chicks. So obviously I went, and her mate was dead a couple of 100 meters down the line against a fir tree. She was lying dead. The chick at the back was dying, and the chick in the front died 2 days later. And, you know, it goes on and on. And it really is just a very sad story. But it's an interesting tale because there's a lot more behind the poisoning of owls and secondary rodenticide poisoning. So what effectively happens is that when people phone me, I've got a whole regime that I ask them, okay, they will say, I've got a rat problem. And I say, right, okay, if it's a private residence, what are you doing? And the interesting fact is that 99% of people who phone me with a rat problem have one thing in common. They feed birds in their garden. And what happens is when you put out seed and when you put out fruit, you attract house rat or black rat. They're one and the same. And they end up in your roof. Now, trying to get through to people that feeding birds is not a very good idea. It actually just attracts rats. And secondly, that from good, sound, scientific, solid scientific basis, you should not be encouraging all these birds to feed in one spot, because every single day, believe it or not, for the last 2 weeks, today again, I get a message, oh, there are a lot of birds dying in my garden. Are you feeding all the birds in the same spot? Yes, no, we're feeding birds. Exactly. So they're all getting whatever is killing them, and the whole lot die in a big heap in your garden. And unfortunately, to get people to understand that they should not be feeding birds, in majority of cases, like I said, it's the feeding of birds in the garden that brings the rats. The person who feeds the birds might be not inclined to put out poison, but the neighbor also suffers under the rats, bearing in mind that a house rat's forage distance from males about 1.5 kilometers, puts out poison. He doesn't care. And you know what happens? All the predators in the area get poisoned. So there's often a misnomer among people that, and this is the thing I love, and this misnomer is that, first of all, owls will not feed on dead rats. Now, with the amount of experience I have with owls, I can tell you now that no raptor, no predator will ever leave an easy meal alone. So I can go out tonight, the owls that visit my garden to come and fight with those that have been rehabilitated will be sitting outside. I can take a dead rat, throw it on the roof, and I promise you 5 minutes later, it'll be gone. So the whole story of, and it's another mind-blowing thing, but a lot of it is misinformation and basically eco-fraud. But it's another mind-blowing thing that people believe that if you put poison in your roof, aka rodenticide, that the rats do not leave the roof. They will die inside the roof and the owls will not catch them outside. That's another myth that spreads. So we've got the owls don't eat dead rats, and if you put poison in your roof, you're quite safe because the rats won't go out the roof. So, you know, you go for years and years and you watch all of these birds die. And this is a particularly interesting case. And this illustrates the real knockdown effect of some of these rodenticides. And it's amazing when I see these pictures, I can remember each individual case as if it happened yesterday. Got a phone call, 7 o'clock in the morning. 2 old people in a retirement village. They said an owl had just landed in their garden and they were, it didn't look well. At 7:20, exactly 20 minutes later, I got to the house. And in those 20 minutes, the owl had already died. So from flying, it landed in their garden. And you know, these old folks, they've got nothing better to do. So 5 o'clock in the morning, they're wafting around the garden. So they could even tell me the exact time the owl had landed. And they phoned me virtually immediately. In 20 minutes, that owl had died. I took it to a local veterinary practice and they did an autopsy. That owl looked, the internals of the owl looked like it had been shot with a shotgun. In fact, in some of the other photos, you can actually see the blood running down from the owl's mouth. And so it goes on. And if you look at this owl carefully, you will see in the feces, you can see the bloody hemorrhage coming out. This owl was particularly tragic. I won't forget him because I really thought he was going to make it.
Arnold, are you back on?
Yeah, I'm back on.
Thank you.
Okay, where did you lose me? Okay, so this.
First, I'll mute myself just when you said you thought the owl will make it, and then it's.
Okay. Sorry. Okay, so this owl I really thought would make it. We got it treated and everything, and I thought this owl's going to be okay. Although there was a really severe hemorrhage, he died within 3-4 hours after we treated him. And I mean, it is absolutely frightening that these birds can die so quickly. And I've got a lot of interesting theories, the reasons that I believe these birds are dying. And I mean, there you can look at the pellet and the bloody hemorrhage in it. You know, there's no debate. There was a very interesting thing. Let's call it eco-fraud number 4. I drew a lot of, and I still have drawn a lot of public attention to the secondary poisoning, particularly of owls and other predators. And it has been very interesting that certain experts in the field have diagnosed these birds as dying of avian flu. Now, personally, I've dealt with quite a few birds and avian flu, and I'm sure Dr. Matt will back me up there. Their feces and their pellets, and they definitely don't look like this. Some days, the slaughter is quite appalling. 3 dead owls in one day. I do remember that day. And that, unfortunately, was around a large warehouse. The big problem with raptors, and this is a very interesting fact, is that when people phone me and they say, Arnold, I heard an owl in my garden, the first thing I say is, you've got a rat problem. And they will say, yeah, no, we heard rats in the roof or something like that. And the problem with all of your decent, good hunting birds is immediately there's a large aggregation or a large congregation of rats in an area, the owls will be there hunting. If there's a large congregation of pigeons, doves, whatever in the area, the peregrine falcons will be there hunting. So unfortunately, wherever you have a rodent problem, which is invariably where you have a lot of poison, the birds are there. Now, this in its own was an extremely interesting case. And this happened in Cape Road, funny enough, not too far from Dr. Mattenham's clinic. And I got a call from, this is a business premises, and I got a call about an owl lying dead on the ground. And funny enough, the mate was sitting there above it and sat above it all the time, even when I picked up the bird. The bird had died from secondary rodenticide poisoning, and I made quite a big scene about it. And if you look on behind where the owl is sitting on the previous photo, you would have seen some thick trees and that. Lo and behold, a day later, I get a phone call from a woman. Very, very sad for herself. And I said, yeah, what's the problem? She said, no, well, you know where you found that poisoned owl? She said, they come into my garden. So I said, and are you using rodenticide? Yes, no, but we were told if you put it in the roof, it won't kill the owls. Anyway, needless to say, one of those weird stories, but she actually turned totally in the opposite direction. She got herself a whole lot of traps, and she supplies me with owls for the rat. But it is quite frightening, the sheer amount of house rats that she catches. I think so far she's probably supplied me over 200 rats. And that's a very nice part of town. It also gives an idea of how bad the rat populations are. So, you know, you look at all of these birds. This bird comes out the cemetery who was suffering from trich and secondary poisoning. Here's another interesting case, and this is also a bit aggravating because in that tree in the background there, I put up an owl nest box. The owls bred successfully there. And behind this house, in other words, looking at me to my left, there was a house that had been standing vacant, and some people of Oriental persuasion moved in. And of course, they were running shops. So they brought a whole lot of goods and stuff and stored it in the back. And it genuinely looked like a warehouse in the back of the property. And of course, the rats came. And it didn't take long for the very same people to toss whatever poison they chose, whatever brand of rodenticide, who knows what it is. And that was the end of both those adult owls at that nest box of mine. The biggest thing for me is, and this is the absolute tragedy, when are owls hunting at their hardest? When they got chicks. They need to hunt and to kill lots of things to feed those chicks. And the problem is that is when they're at greatest risk of secondary rodenticide poisoning. And that is when they poison literally the whole clutch out. The other sad thing is, this happened this year a number of times, is when the adult birds are actually brooding and they get poisoned, they die on the nest, on the eggs. And like I said, it goes on everywhere. Now, one of the things that I do enjoy about social media, and this story was also quite amazing because this bird flew into the hotel there. This is on the beachfront, flew into the hotel and just died. Just flew, landed on the ground, stood around for a couple of minutes and died. Also suffering from secondary rodenticide poisoning. But the next picture is going to fill the whole story. If we believed all we see on social media, we believe that this owl was enjoying a lovely sunset on the beach. Well, it wasn't. That was that one's mate. It's actually busy dying. And one of the things that you'll find with a lot of severely rodenticide poisoned birds is they go to water. They obviously have the urge to drink copious amounts of liquid, which they keep going through. And you'll invariably find them, if they've got enough strength, around water. That bird died probably about 2 hours later. Remember what I said about the water? Bird baths, jacuzzis, swimming pools. You find an owl in the middle of the day. There are occasions where you get juveniles that'll, in the middle of the day, mess around and sit out in the open and that. But the adult owls, you find an adult owl sitting by a bird bath in the middle of the day. This one was actually sitting by a lot of tanks. Swimming pool. That owl died very quickly. That owl died 2 or 3 hours later. Also, funny enough, very close to the vet practice Dr. Matt has. And funny, when I caught that owl in the net, you can see the hemorrhage in the feces, the bloody hemorrhage. Right, not funny, but I mean, it's pretty normal. Interesting thing that I've experienced on a number of occasions is people actually saying the birds fall dead out of the sky or fall dead out of the tree. And like I say, some of these owls that land in the gardens die within 20, 30 minutes after landing. And these birds, yeah, in particular, this place, yeah, that bird came, sat on the roof, and funny enough, there are a lot of students there, and they actually just watched it fold up, and it just slid, dropped to the ground, and was dead within a minute or two. So if you look at the bigger picture of rodenticide poisoning, as we move into more natural areas, the first thing that happens is the big warehousing or the mall or whatever comes up, right? So you've got your indigenous rodents in the area, and then they put the poison baits out. So unlike house rats and brown rats, house mice, your indigenous rodents are particularly dumb. They're very much inclined to go into those bait boxes. They get poisoned first. So what happens is once they poison, then they proceed to poison out all the other raptors in the area that eat rodents and the snakes, brown house snakes, olive house or night snakes as they're now called, any snake species that eats rodents, your little predators, your striped weasel, your striped polecat, your mongooses, your genets, all of them, they all get poisoned out. So eventually you have this habitat around these malls, and that's totally devoid of any natural predators. And then the exotics move in. The exotics are far better adapted to living around inside human structure. They've got a high level of immunity to the poisons. Very interesting that exotic rodents teach the youngsters bait avoidance. They teach them to avoid all of these myriad of bait boxes that are lying around. So then a rodent problem develops. So how does the pest control industry handle the rodent problem? They put out a poison grease. Now, what poison grease is, it's a grease that's obviously poisoned, and they then paint it in the areas the rodents walk. So if you'll see a runway along a beam or a pipe, they'll paint that full of poison grease. The rats run along it. Of course, they get onto the fur and then they start to clean themselves. While they're busy cleaning themselves, of course, they're getting poisoned as well. Now, you can imagine that is a double dose of poison for any predator in the area. And the problem is that some of those that are poisoned like that actually don't die. They develop an even higher level of immunity. So what they're forced to do is they're forced to use more and more and more potent rodenticides to try and counteract the level of immunity in rodents. So this is an interesting story, because this, I call him, whenever I wonder why I do what I do, then I have a look at this little guy's face. So I put a lot of pressure on the press to keep publicizing stories regarding the secondary rodenticide poisoning of owls in particular and other predators. And one of my good friends from the press, a journalist called Guy Rogers, he phoned me one day and he said, Arnold, he said, I'm telling you now, he said, not all is doom and gloom. I think you're wrong here. He said, the municipal depot in Harrow Road has an adult pair of eagle owls breeding, and they got 4 chicks. And I said, well, that's nice. I like to be proven wrong in those instances. I know I'm not wrong because I know the sheer amount of birds that come into me, but I know I'm not wrong about the amount that have been poisoned. But it's nice that in some places owls are having a little bit of fight back, and their numbers are starting to recover. About 2 weeks later, Monday morning, the municipal staff come on duty. I get a phone call from the manager of the depot. He says to me, Arnold, do you want to come down and have a look? He says, the adult birds are lying dead. We can only find one of the chicks left alive. Of course, they all died from secondary poisoning, which was to be expected. That was one of the adults lying dead in the tree there. No avian flu or anything. There's just far too much random use of these toxic chemicals wherever we go. And, you know, I often I don't like to use the term the uneducated or the peasants or whatever, but I get all of these phone calls from these people, and some of them you wonder seriously, but you can excuse them. They are not in the natural field. A lot of them don't understand natural principles. They don't understand basic ecology or anything like that. So they don't really grasp the point of the use of these toxic chemicals. But people that are in scientific fields and the educated people should at least have an idea of how dangerous these things are. Again, I go back, and every time I look, this is another really, really sad case. And look where it's sitting in the bird bath, the final hours of its life. And there, my good friend, Dr. Matt, having a look at another poisoned owl that we brought in his clinic. So what are the signs we look for? You can often see the mouth is extremely pale, particularly in birds that have been down for a long time and hemorrhaged a lot. One thing we found is looking at the eyes. So you start off with a bird that's got slightly poison. This is a bird that's been down for some time. Look at the almost dark blacky blood in the veins in the eyes. And this is a bird that's about to die. There you can see the hemorrhage all over the eyes. In fact, if you look into the pupil, it's kind of sad. You can see the last human peering at it. So one of Dr. Matt's favorite tests, and something that I really is how fast or how long does the blood take to clot. In some instances, it's frightening. I've learned a few horrible lessons. A lot of people might want to believe that I say, whoa, everything is secondary rodenticide poisoning. Owls die of lots of things. They get hit by motor vehicles. They die from old age, obviously, various other things. They can get barbed wire fences are actually really deadly to owls. We get a lot of owls hooked up in barbed wire fences, a lot of things they die from. So I'm very much inclined. So with autopsies and stuff, you can't but notice the hemorrhage all over the internals and that. So there's very little doubt as to what the owl died from. Then something interesting happened the last couple of years. We're getting a lot of owls that have trich. Now, trich is a nasty little organism, and I believe that it occurs in most raptors. In fact, I'm virtually 100% convinced. And it lurks there like a lot of other nasty little things, and it waits till the bird's immune system is suppressed. And how does a bird's immune system get suppressed most of the time? Good old low-level dose of secondary rodenticide poison. The immune system's down, and then trich takes over. And it is, once it's really settled in, very difficult to treat. Dr. Matt has performed some amazing operations, removing and cutting out, and some of the birds you manage to save, a lot of them don't make it. And there is one interesting thing. All of these birds we treated had some degree of secondary rodenticide poisoning, which proves my point. Immediately, the immune system of the birds is suppressed. All of those nasty little opportunistic things take their chance, leap in, and it might not die directly of secondary poisoning, but it dies of associated things. This is a very interesting thing. A lot of owls get killed in our roads, really a lot of owls. So also a little bit perturbing is the fact that a lot of the immigrants in South Africa, unlike traditionally our Khoisan people, are scared of owls. They don't actually want anything to do with them. They're quite happy to stone them or chase them, but they don't want anything to do with them. But a lot of people like Kenyans, Malawians, some Zambians, Tanzanians, and that actually believe that owls are good luck. So whereas in the old days, I would always get, if an owl was hit by the car, hit by a motor vehicle sitting next to the side of the road, I would get it invariably. Someone would phone, pick it up, call me, whatever. There's an owl next to the road, and I'd go and collect it. Nowadays, I rarely see that because most of these birds are picked up. So remember what I said about, oh, well, I don't want to just blame rodenticide for everything. Owls get killed by cars. I read a really interesting piece of research by a Canadian scientist called Sophie Hindmarch. And what she did is she took blood samples from owls that were hit by motor vehicles. The frightening thing is most of them had secondary poisoning to some degree. Now, the interesting thing is, what does secondary poisoning do at a low level? Obviously, it suppresses the bird's immune system, but it also slows its motor functions down. Remember, the bird's dealing with hemorrhage, is dealing with a couple of little parasites that are trying their luck now because the bird's down. So it doesn't respond as quickly to stimuli as it should. And this is where the whole eco-fraud thing comes in as well, because a lot of these eco-friendly, owl-friendly, raptor-friendly poisons are based on a very unscientific principle that maybe the rodent won't eat as much rodenticide, so the owl will not get a toxic dose, but not taking into effect that even a minor dose will play a role in causing the bird not to function properly. It may not respond to stimuli, it may not be fertile, it doesn't hunt properly, and all of those things provide that window for an opportunistic organism like trich to leap in and take over. Right, so you've looked at eagle owl. So what other raptors are poisoned? So we have barn owls. Now, the interesting thing is Dr. Matt and I had a conversation, and a lot of birders have told me the same. You barely see a barn owl in town. Worldwide, barn owl populations have plummeted in a lot of areas. Now, if you think about it carefully, a barn owl is far smaller than the eagle owl, far more susceptible to secondary poisoning. And the other thing about a barn owl is it's not really a visible owl. They're sneaky, they like holes, they like roofs. They're not out in the open like an eagle owl sitting on a tree at night. So when they die or get really ill, where do they go? They creep into some horrible little hidey hole and you never find them again. And this is one of the reasons why I feel we don't find that many barn owls, but our barn owl population has plummeted. It's very, very rare to see barn owls now in town. And that's the interesting thing about rehabilitation. So I've got records for 25 years of rehabilitation. And if I look at my records, I can tell you now what species are disappearing and the few species that are starting to develop a reasonably good foothold in the urban areas. For example, if you look at your owls and stuff, your barn owls have disappeared to a large degree. Grass owls have disappeared to a large degree. Marsh owls are gone. Eagle owls, there's some suburbs where there are no eagle owls left, the other suburbs where there are eagle owls left. There's always a little bit of a flux. Once we release the 40 odd we're going to release now, and they get back into town, they go into some new suburbs, try their luck there. A few survive, a lot don't. So you'll have a bit of a flux of the eagle owl population. But what's really interesting is how barn owls and grass owls have just disappeared. Now, there is a bit of truth in habitat destruction, particularly for grass owls, because there's a lot of overgrazing of open space in that. So obviously, there's not that much decent grass cover for them. Marsh owls, we've had the longest drought ever. I think it's 9 or 10 years we've had no decent rain. Most flays and marshes have had no water in them for a long time. So that could be one reason. But the barn owls per se, I would get sometimes 11, 12 a month coming in. Youngsters from their sites and that, you don't see that anymore. This barn owl is here for a reason. The reason is this barn owl belonged to a very good friend of mine and lived in a hammerkop nest in his tree, in his garden, in his nursery. So also been one of those that just chooses not to listen. After I told him numerous times he had a rat problem, I said, Bernard, look at something else. You are the cause of the rat problem. In fact, when people say to me, I've got a rat problem, I say, no, you don't have a rat problem. You've got a people problem. Don't look at the rat as the problem. Look at yourself as the problem. See what you're doing wrong to encourage these creatures and how you can control them. Anyway, so I look at this barn owl over here, and every time I remember Bernard's sad tale. So I said to him, Bernard, please don't put out any poison. Rather make it difficult for the rats, control them, etc., etc. Bernard being inclined for an easy, quick fix, chose not to listen. He put rodenticide out. The only sweet revenge for this owl was that Bernard's favorite dog then got secondary poisoning, and it cost him almost 20,000 Rand at the vet to save it. Bernard never put out poison again. Sadly, he had to learn because of his dog and not because of the fact that he wiped out a whole family of barn owls that had lived there for 20 odd years already. So what I often notice, and this is one of the sad things, because I think it's about 54 active raptor nest box sites in town. My nest box sites, once the poisoning starts, now these are rock kestrels, so you'll find one baby out, the next day there'll be another dead baby, next day another dead chick, till there are no more chicks, and then the parents die. So it is very interesting. This is one of the things I look for around. Once you start finding this baby starts out, you know that they're starting to feed poison food. So invariably the youngsters die first and the adults follow behind, particularly with rock kestrels. We get a lot of poisoned rock kestrels in their small bird. So they are very, very susceptible even to the tiniest amounts of rodenticide. Harrier hawks, most of you young raptors like this juvenile Harrier hawk or Banded gymna genus, I kind of prefer the name. They will take rodents wherever possible. And this bird is actually on the verge of being released, so he looks a lot better than he did. But he was also suffering from secondary rodenticide poison around a very popular children's farm, one of these touch farms. And of course, you know what happens at children's touch farms. There's lots of chickens, there's lots of food, etc., etc. This brings the rats and poison's put out. So who pays the price? The interesting thing for me has been the demise of the African goshawk in town. So there are a number of things that puts the African goshawk population under pressure. One has been for a long time the ever increasing black sparrowhawk population. So black sparrowhawks, as we are inclined to call them, great white sharks of the sky, they catch everything around their nest sites in the areas. They eat African goshawks. They'll catch every bird. I've watched them catch black-shouldered kites, whatever they can catch, they catch and kill. And African goshawks, of course, favoring very much a similar habitat, pay the price for that. But the last couple of years, black sparrowhawks have been severely hammered by mite, which ultimately kills them after a time. So the black sparrowhawk population has gone down, and you would expect the African goshawk population to climb. That has not happened because, unfortunately, particularly the urban African goshawks are very much rat catchers. So we get more, well, not more, actually less over the last couple of years, less than our fair share of African goshawks coming in suffering from secondary rodenticide poisoning. We had one from vitamin D3 poisoning, which is particularly nasty. We'll discuss that just now. Lana Falcons are really interesting. So when I started off, Lana Falcons were the most common falcon around town. I've got, at the moment, 5 breeding pairs of African peregrines in my nest boxes, and they have definitely taken over as the falcon of town. And I have a reason for that. First of all, Lanas are very susceptible to secondary rodenticide poisoning. Lanas eat anything they can catch. So they eat from geckos to guinea fowl and anything in between. And of course, they're big rodent catchers. So there's been quite a drop in the urban Lana population. Peregrines, different story, specialist bird catchers, and they have really started to thrive. And quite amazing to see how they've taken over the gap left by the Lanas. And very sad that because of the falcons, Lanas and rock kestrels come in regularly suffering from secondary rodenticide poisoning. There's another sub-adult Lana, also secondary rodenticide poisoning victim. Pooted Eagles. This has been very interesting for me as well, because over the last couple of years, Pooted Eagles have made quite I wouldn't say a comeback, but they've really settled a lot around town, and we often get them, but normally dead when we get them. And booteds are really, really good predators, taking a lot of birds, but they also take a fair amount of rodents in their diet. And 3 times now I've got booteds that have died from secondary rodenticide poisoning, which is a bit sad considering they've just started to really move back into town again. This year I've seen quite a few in town hunting. This is very interesting, and this is something that tells you how high up the food chain all of the stuff goes. This secretary bird was suffering from secondary rodenticide poisoning. What is interesting is I used to get in, and of course, I'm sure many of you are aware by now that secretary birds are an endangered species. I used to get in 4 or 5 secretary birds a year from the greater metro area, and that unfortunately stopped. And so far, I think I received 3 of them in that were suffering from secondary rodenticide poisoning. This bird made a full recovery. But I mean, if you look at the size of a secretary bird compared to barn owl, and this bird was hit hard enough that it was eventually not capable of flying and relatively easy to catch. Again, there is no way that people can decide what gets killed by that rodenticide they put out. So you look at your other predators. Genets are a prime example. You know, this is a secondary poisoned genet from Humewood in town, and a host of other things, mongooses and that. One of the things that particularly bothers me is around the suburb that I stay in, which is notorious for poisoning owls, are a relatively stable population of striped weasels. And it's always been fascinating. Every now and then I get a phone call from a garden and I find a striped weasel in a tree surrounded by dogs and that. And the striped weasel population, because they are predominantly small rodent hunters, in fact, if you look at them and those that are found dead and I've done autopsies on and looked at the stomach contents, a lot of rodents feature mainly in their diet. They also would suffer heavily from secondary rodenticide poisoning. Now, it's amazing how when it hits the pets, then all of a sudden people start to wake up. Look at the size of this dog. Now imagine this is a dog that has got secondary rodenticide poisoning. You know what this dog's equivalent to? 75 barn owls in weight. 75 barn owls. And look what eating a poisoned rat did to him. Now you're going to try and tell me that, oh no, but you know, please people, If this is what eating a poisoned rat did to something the weight of 75 barn owls, imagine what eating one rat to something a 75th of his weight does. So you ask, is it all doom and gloom? No. There are people like myself that lead a fight back, and we say, sorry, there's got to be a better way. Like Rachel Carson, we're firm believers there has to be a better way. This is my resident garden owl. He's a wild owl that comes to visit for a little Barney and a little fight every now and then with my owls. But he comes and he sits there on that sign, my 2 bat boxes, most evenings, and calls out to the whole area. And what I really love is you'll hear the screech of brakes as someone stops outside, almost unbelieving that there's an owl sitting there. And that is actually, while it's very sweet, it's very worrying that people find an owl so intriguing because they just don't see them when there should be an owl on every second lamppost, like there used to be in the old days. So the whole time we're pushing, and people need to start thinking, because what blows my mind is I get called in to a lot of vets. I get called into the local vet here by me. There's a guy almost in tears. He's got 3 chameleons dying from poisoning. Yeah, but he never puts poison. I said, what did you put in your garden? No, I only put some of that white stuff for the ants and that. I said, geez. And you seriously don't think you're going to poison other things? You seriously think it just kills the ants? You seriously think when you put rodenticide out, it's just going to kill rodents and nothing else? So I've spent a lot of time looking. Now, I am one that is very wary of, let's call it mumbo jumbo. And when I say mumbo jumbo, we've got to be really careful. If you're going to give someone a solution, you need to give them a real solution. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there who will tell you, oh no, just put up an owl box, end of your problem. That is bull. You have to give people an answer to their problems. Otherwise, it'll never work. So when I have to deal in situations, and I have a lot of these situations to deal with, and people say, if I put up an owl box, I'll say, no, wait a minute. First of all, look at why you have a problem. Identify the root cause of your problem. Handle that. Once you've handled that, right, then look at putting an owl nest box up, because you can put up 50 owl nest boxes, but if you're supplying food for thousands of rats, it's not going to work. You need to first handle the rat problem, then encourage the predators. And you know, one of the biggest things is, like I said, the simple thing like the homeowners feeding birds in the garden. When you go into the big corporations, and I deal with some of the biggest corporations in this country. Now, you go into a massive food warehouse, there's hundreds and hundreds of tons of good rat food sitting inside there. And in the middle of the warehouse, they have the damaged goods section. And for those of you who don't know, damaged goods is where all the broken bits and bobs, and there's leaking jars of alcohol and all kinds of things are then put in the middle of this warehouse, very untidily, not like the rest of the warehouse, providing perfectly adequate food, water, shelter, everything that a rodent will require. And they sit with a massive rodent problem, and the only solution is, well, we'll put on more poison. And you say to them, listen, you know, how about moving the damaged goods out of the area, put it outside, put it well away from the building, and then the problem drops by 90%, and they look at you, well, you know, Eugenia, it's simple. When you deal with a problem, you need to look at it, stand back, have a good look at it, and particularly the rodent problems, because a rodent problem is a failure in sanitation. It's a human problem. And when I've got to give talks, my favorite thing is a little thing. It's all about instant gratification. So you walk into your house, in your kitchen, there's a whole cloud of flies. Grab the can of doom, you spray. All the flies fall dead. Instant gratification, you solve the problem. Never once does the average human say, why have I got flies in my kitchen? How can I stop it? My bin's not closed properly. I'm not handling my waste effectively. Now, instead, we grab that instant gratification, you know, like our rats in the roof, let's just throw some poison in the roof, and we spray doom in the air. Not once thinking that we're spraying a neurotoxin, which we're absorbing, all of our pets and children absorb. Notice the order I put it in: pets first, children second. All of the residents in the house are absorbing, right? There's no thought of that. We just had the instant gratification because that is what we taught. The answer to our problems lies in chemicals. And the words of Rachel Carson have never been truer than they are today. As crude a weapon as the caveman's club, the chemical barrage we hurl against the fabric of life. So yeah, you see, bats are one of my favorite allies. And it was very interesting. I managed the World Cup Stadium as one of the things that's been managed without poison since its inception, since 2010. There's no rodenticide. They don't use it. And one of the things that a lot of pitchers have a problem with is certain moths that come and lay eggs and they damage the pitch, etc., etc. And before they would be spraying insecticide, now they rely on the bats from our bat box who have a wonderful time feasting on all manner of creature on that pitch. So when you look at the mess we've made of this world, you have to try and find ways of mitigating things. And one of the things I looked at was using power lines as a place to put up bat boxes to encourage bats to utilize the power lines in a lot of areas. This I put up as part of a mosquito control program. And you know, the thing is, everyone wants to think they're coming up with novel ideas. Let me tell you, in the 50s, Transnet already was putting up massive bat boxes to control mosquito problems in Komati Port. Anyway, so this was one of the projects I was involved with. Wherever I've gone, I've put up Raptor nest boxes, and there's a reason for that. Those owls remind people why we shouldn't be using poison. And I've had amazing success with a lot of my nest boxes. Then my big goal was to get a lot of corporates to stop using poison, which I have been successful to a degree. So if you look at this, this is the Disa Power peaking, part of a very interesting endangered aloe relocation project that I did there as well. But these people use no poison whatsoever, nothing. They don't put out rodenticide or anything, which is great because a lot of raptors hunt around their sites. The same with the IDZ. Now I want to ask you with tears in my eyes. This is the port of Nuga. Since its inception, I've managed the whole international port without using poison. How do I do it? Encourage natural predators, good waste management. It's very simple. Go back to the rodent thing. It's a failure in sanitation. You manage your waste effectively. You encourage natural predators. They do the job for you. But putting up Raptor nest boxes there would have achieved nothing if the waste management was not up to standard. And at the same time, in the port of Nuga, what happens? Because they use no poison, species like the pygmy hairy-footed gerbil are safe. And these are endemic species that would have been wiped out had they have put poison the way they wanted to put poison. When I say poison, rodenticide, but I think most of you know what I'm meaning. It's just rodenticide poison, no matter what you choose to do. Then people will come to me and say, oh, but you need to trust science. Really? Have a look at that ad. This one, even something more to remind you about why you should be trusting science. So what happens is, and this is where Dr. Matt was quite involved with me, I go to the Western Cape. And this is an example, and this is a warning example of how science is corrupted by giant pharmaceutical companies. Go to the Western Cape, train gun dogs, one of the sports I enjoy, training pointers. I got my good friend Brandon with me. Brandon is the arch typical capitalist pig, owns 6 or 7 farms, owns how many different businesses, etc., etc., and knows everything about everything. Walking along, and I'm looking at the ground, and I said, Brandon, what's this blue stuff here? The canola plants are coming up. What's this blue stuff? He says, oh, no, that's snail bait. He says, you know, canola is like cabbage family, and snails love it, so the farmers have got to toss snail bait. So I look around, and I do the maths in my head, and I thought, you know, we're talking thousands and thousands and thousands of hectares that are covered with the snail bait. So anyway, so we're working. So now my mind's working overtime, thinking, you know, when last have I seen a bat-eared fox around here? Now, the interesting thing about training gun dogs, which I'm sure not too many of you know about, but the training of gun dogs is basically when you train a pointing breed, it's not allowed to chase anything, and it has to remain steady when it finds something and point it. So bat-eared foxes are the most challenging of all, because when a bat-eared fox pops up in front of a pointer, it waves that nice furry tail, has a look over its shoulder and says, well, chase me, chase me, chase me. So we do enjoy having them around because they're very good to train your dog to be steady. And I said, you know, Brandon, I haven't seen bat-eared foxes here in 2 or 3 years now, and there used to be plenty. Every single cliff had a family of bat-eared foxes that used to torment the dogs. So we carry on walking. Now it's a hot day. And I said, let's take the dogs down into the cliff, let them get some water to drink there. Off the dogs go, they have a good drink out the cliff. 10 minutes later, the dogs are violently ill, really, really violently ill. So by now, I'm starting to look at things. So we'll leave this part out because this is where the funny part comes. So I made a big scene about it. The next thing, I get tackled by some agricultural scientists. You people, you greenies who know nothing about anything. Agriculture keeps this country alive. You don't know what you're talking about, etc., etc. I said to him, listen, there's no ways you can tell me, oh no, metaldehyde just breaks down. There's no way, doesn't end up in the ecosystem. We've got our own experts and they'll tell you, you don't know what you're talking about. I said, listen, I don't believe you. Now, what I didn't tell him is the first thing when those dogs got seriously ill, I took water samples. So I get back to town, I chat to Dr. Matt, and I said, hey, can we do anything with these samples? He tried around, and nobody seemed very keen on testing the samples for us. Finally got a lab, I think in Cape Town, he can correct me. I think it was in Cape Town. The lab said they'll do it, but they won't put their name to the result. The result was that water, I stand under correction, but I think I'm right. Dr. Matt can correct me if I'm wrong, had 70 times the safe for humans amount of metaldehyde in it. 70 times the safe for human amount. Now that is going into the Breda River. It's going into all the water systems, right? It's going into all of the wildlife in that area. But here I get told by scientists, no, you're wrong. That stuff just breaks down. You imagine as far as your eye can see, that is covered with metaldehyde or snailbait. Needless to say, I received a very nasty shock because I got back to town, went to the local co-op, and there was a truck parked outside with tons and tons of snailbait. And I said, where's that going? Oh, no, that goes to the citrus farmers because they have a big problem with snails. So they also toss tons of metaldehyde all around their trees. So yes, it's a war that's been fought for a long time. And like I say, every now and then I get tired of fighting the war, and then I stand up again. I look at some of the creatures that come in, and I say, well, someone's got to keep this going, because I find it very, very suspicious and very strange that very little is said about this. There are organizations in this country who task themselves with various things like birds, etc., and you hear sweet, although they well know about it. And what is interesting is one of the well-known organizations that task itself with looking after and being interested in the birds and the avifauna of our country would not do an article in their magazine. So immediately I took a very strong stance against all rodenticide, because it is my professional opinion, and it's a very informed opinion as far as I'm concerned, because I work so much with these birds that are poisoned, is that there is no such thing as eco-friendly or raptor-friendly poison. There is no such thing. Science tells you it's impossible. And you know, I'm never afraid to say so, as you can see in the press. And rodenticide to me is just another DDT. It's going everywhere. It's right through the ecosystem. It's in the water we drink. It's in the rivers, the streams. What is interesting, it's even found in blue whales. Now, a lot of conservation agencies throughout the world have taken the stance of the lesser of two evils, and they are using rodenticide randomly on islands and places like that to control rodents. And effectively, what they're doing is they're trying a shotgun approach, because you just don't know where that pellet's going to hit. Point of the matter is that there was a very interesting story, and I'm sure it has been quietly buried. The place, McCluskey Island. Now, McCluskey Island, somewhere in Canada there, and the Canadian government decided, because it had a massive rat problem, they were just going to bomb it with rodenticide. Well, a couple of weeks went by, and all of a sudden they were picking up dead bald eagles all over the place, and people were shocked. You know, why are these bald eagles dying? And what not one of the geniuses even thought about was the fact that gulls will scavenge. So the rats that were dying from secondary rodenticide poison were getting killed by gulls, who in turn got sick, who were being caught by bald eagles. The Canadian government answered, oh, well, our bald eagle population is safe, so we can lose a good few. That's not an issue. Point of the matter is, I had the same thing in PA. I got a phone call one day, and a woman said to me, listen, there are a lot of sick seagulls around the beachfront. Went down, had a look, and what happened is you've got all these restaurants along the beachfront, so you can imagine you've got a really, really healthy exotic rodent population, and the restaurants were putting out poison all over the place, and the municipality who just dumped, believe it or not, rodenticide in the drains and that. And of course, the poisoned rodents were coming out and the gulls were eating them and they were getting poisoned. Very, very simple, but there you can see that it just keeps on going down the chain. Now we get to the critical part of the talk. So all the while, certain persons and certain organizations have expounded on an amazing product. It's absolutely blown my mind because nowhere else in the world has happened. And I think the only thing that possibly even rivals the amazingness of all of these products could possibly be Immaculate Conception, and that is raptor-friendly rodenticide. So all of a sudden, the evil face of rodenticide was given a rather sweet face because now it's raptor, eco, owl-friendly, whatever. And what happened was really interesting. At the same time, I picked up a massive climb in the number of rodenticide poison. This is 1 month's rodenticide poison birds about 10, 12 years ago. I picked up a massive climb in the amount of secondary rodenticide poison raptors, right? And what effectively happened is that a good few veterinary practices said to me they also picked up a lot more secondary poison pets. And why was that? Because when you tell the general public, oh, this is eco-friendly, this is raptor-friendly, this is owl-friendly, what do? They don't use the product with caution. They put, oh, no, it's eco-friendly, can't harm anything, it's harmless, etc., etc. And I just find it so weird that in the whole of this world, South Africa is the only country that has scientists that are capable of finding the eco-friendliness in rodenticide. We nowhere else in the world does anyone even have the temerity to put an eco-friendly face on pesticide. Now, this was really interesting, and it's not about the fact that for 2 decades I've been warning about the scourge of rodenticide, but it actually reminds me how old I'm getting. Anyway, point of the matter is that is when Dr. Laurel Sorais came to Cape Town, and all of a sudden everyone jumped, but it died very quickly, I must say. Everyone jumped around because she was picking up rodenticide everywhere. And someone like Dr. Laurel Sorais, who's had a lot of expertise in the topic and worked in California extensively, was able to do it. And everyone was jumping around. The University of Cape Town was saying, it sparked a concern, but for 2 decades, 20 years, I'd already said, this is the new DDT, this is everywhere. And she found it in otters, she found it in the water, she found it in caracal, she found it virtually everywhere. Her main field of study has been bobcats and the effect of secondary rodenticide poisoning on bobcats. And I must say that the Americans have probably led the way, and particularly organizations like rats, raptors are the solution, and a lot of other people that have just stood up and said, this kind of use of pesticide is not acceptable. It's got far too much knock-on effect. And if you look here, you can see a very interesting thing that they've put out to say this is what rodenticide does. But this is more interesting to me. So they're pushing forward a bill that will require pesticide companies to provide customers with written information on the strategies, integrated pest management, or IPM, which integrated pest management, basically what I do. In other words, you don't use poison, you look at natural means, you look at better waste control, you look at trapping, whatever, and also inform their customers on the effects of rodenticides on wildlife and the environment. Because many homeowners have said they would not have used these poisons if they knew the effects. And this is very, very interesting because it goes further to say that all state buildings and land in Massachusetts will use integrated pest management. So it's an outstanding breakthrough, and the Americans have led the way in it. So when I look at science, I look at this now. Now, this is the active ingredient in one raptor-friendly rodenticide, Difenocum. So if you have a look at this, these are the incidents. Now, remember, these are but a small example. If I can give you a practical idea, I think that the birds that are receiving are probably less than 10% of the actual birds, because what does any sick wild animal do? It goes into the deepest, darkest corner, and there it hides away and invariably dies. So you don't really get every single bird. So if you have a look here, what are you looking at? Cat, stoat, weasel, dog, buzzard, kestrel, barn owl, red kite, pigeons, peacock. If you look at the next one, you're seeing red kite, badger, foxes, gray squirrels, rat, blackbird, buzzard, fox, even a pony, cat and dog. So now this is advocated as something that has very little risk. Take note, they don't say no risk, very low risk of secondary poisoning. And one company has now produced a product with eco in front of it. And the active ingredient here, which they assure us has no risk of secondary poisoning for raptors, you can read for yourself what it says there. Even small ingestions in dogs and cats, potentially fatal. Now, the one thing is that a lot of people are looking at mammals. When you look at a bird and its structure and the capillaries and the lungs and that, it is far more susceptible to massive hemorrhage than dogs and cats. So it doesn't need a large amount of these products to actually cause massive hemorrhage, debilitating hemorrhage that brings the bird down and ultimately kills. More and more, we're starting to find a lot and receive a lot of poison garden birds. And this is very sad. And again, I've said many times, you walk into a nursery nowadays, there's sometimes more pesticides than there are plants in the nursery. And it is frightening that people go and randomly use these highly toxic, not only to wildlife, but to human products in their gardens, on their fruit, etc., etc. And you find birds like Nars Naluris in perfectly good condition, lying dead in gardens. And if you guys thought that you were going to get away with spraying locusts all over the Karoo and not have any side effects, what was I told? The product is virtually harmless and won't affect raptors. I got bad news for you. Organophosphate poisoning, fish eagle, classic example. Aside from rodenticide, the massive chemical onslaught against the life around us. So, to end this thing, what did Frank Graham say? Rachel Carson has been proven right. What have we done about it? I can tell you what we've done about it. Nothing. We've been duped. We've been fooled. We believe all of the mumbo jumbo. And at the end of the day, we look past real science and say, oh, well, you know, we'll solve our conscience because on this box, on this label, yeah, it says eco-friendly, raptor-friendly, owl-friendly, so that we're doing the right thing.
Arnold, there was a question right up front, and I'm going to ask anybody that has any questions for the audience or for Arnold from the audience to please put up their hands utilizing the tools at the bottom of your screen. There are the reactions, and you can raise your hand there, and I will then automatically divert to you. There was a question and it was answered, but I'd like a bit more detail for the room. If we could just go into a bit more detail on what is trike.
Sorry, what is?
What is trike or trite?
Trichomoniasis. It's basically in fact, Dr. Matt, unmute Dr. Matt. He can give us, he describes it very well in his good veterinary way. So you unmute him, he can answer better.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, trike is caused by Parasite Trichomonas. It's a nasty little one-cellular parasite that invades the mucous membranes. And it is relatively common in pigeons and other animals, and also in raptors. And it can really form big abscesses in the roof of the mouth, and then ultimately leads to death, although really more in immunosuppressed animals more than anything else.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravensburg. Justine, you've got a question. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi, Arnold. How are you?
Hi,
I know you moved from Facebook. I wanted to ask you about, you said big pharma, obviously a topic that's very controversial at the moment. What was going on with the author of Silent Spring, and was she being, I guess, censored as you would have in the 1960s, and JFK sort of saved her? What was that whole story?
Okay, So Justine, it was basically a backlash from the pest control industry and the giant pharmaceutical industry, obviously, because this whole thing was about DDT to a large degree. And of course, everyone was saying, you know, you don't know what you're doing. You're a woman. Can you imagine that a woman speaking out against giant pharma in that time? And basically, there was quite a serious backlash against it. And of course, everyone was trying to badmouth her and say, you don't know what you're doing. You're a woman, etc., etc. And JFK, funny enough, I gained the greatest respect for the man because I could not believe the lengths he went to protect her from the wrath of the pharmaceutical industry. And he made sure that book stayed for as long as he was in the White House. It was on his desk at the White House. Can you believe it?
That's amazing. That's amazing. Do you have any written material on that you could send me? There's one of the doctors I want to share it with.
I'll dig it out. I've got quite a bit in Rachel Carson. In fact, she deserves far more credit because she really was one of the leading women environmentalists by far. And unfortunately, you know, a lot of the good work is hidden and buried, obviously, by people who would not like all of that exposed. So it was a very, very interesting, but Rachel Carson, and I feel that when I started in conservation, one of the first things, when I started studying, one of the first things, that was the first book that everyone said, you need to read The Silent Spring. And I think that it's been lost, but what it says is as important today as it was back in the 60s. So yeah, but you can drop me a private message and I will dig up some stuff for you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much.
Chris, you've got your hand raised.
No question, Alistair. Just want to repeat what I saw on the chat, written by Grace Hofmeyer. She thanks Arnold, and she said, for the food for thought. And I thought that was beautiful. Thanks for the food for thought. Thank you very much. Just wanted to raise that.
Thanks very much, Chris. Are there any other questions in the room? I'm not seeing any hands raised. Marty. We can always rely on Marty.
Thanks, Arnold, for the chat. And my question is not necessarily the normal type one that I'm asking. I'm just interested. Chris mentioned that you do this aside from what else you do. I'm just interested what else you do that allows you to be rescuing 6 or 7 birds a day. And how do you actually keep going? Do you do it only after hours? I mean, it's quite incredible. Have you, what else do you do? Just out of interest.
Okay, so I do a lot of environmental stuff, problem animal control, lots of different things, environmental projects as well. And I always just find time. So, you know, while the average guy's sitting on the weekend, having a braai, having a couple of beers and that, I'm there sorting some owl out at midnight, taking, it's sometimes I just shake my head and I think, geez, you know, you've got to really be crazy, here it is. But I'm not a social kind of person. I don't have kids or anything to worry about. So, and I've had the most amazing ride because if I go back and I think about it, you know that I've had in my hand over 6,000 different raptors. I've successfully rehabilitated over 3,000. How many people can say? I mean, to me, it was common to come home and have a martial eagle sitting in my lounge. It wasn't even unusual. Secretary bird in the backyard. And I'm still like it. I mean, if you go into there's just birds all over the place. So I've really enjoyed it. What has been sad for me, though, is the fact that people do not realize how savage the assault of giant pharma and the chemical industry is on wildlife. And it's blissfully ignored. And I'll tell you why it's ignored, because there is funding definitely that comes in to the right people, and that funding ensures that there is a silence about the owls. And this is not a problem in this country only. This is a problem right throughout every corner of the globe. And the sad thing is that silence is perpetrated by people who are supposed to be out there protecting the environment.
Then the one other question, I mean, you mentioned trapping and whatever of rodents and as an option, but as you also said, they are so clever. I mean, we've had a trap trying to trap a rat that was actually in our house, and we caught one, and then after that, no rat would ever go near it, that trap again. And yeah, it's really difficult. We don't put down any poison in the garden or anywhere, but you kind of start now living with a problem. And I know you were saying there's other reasons. We don't feed seeds to birds or anything like that. We do have dogs, and they eat their food out of the bowls and whatever. So possibly that's a problem. But what is the other solution to try and, I mean, not use any poison? What would you say? Is it traps, or what's the solution?
Okay, so the first thing is, and a lot of people phone me and say, oh, I want to know how to trap. And I'll say, don't even worry about traps. Look at your immediate environment. So what you do, and I hope you don't mind, I'm going to give you some general advice that a lot of people can actually listen to. So what you do is you go and you see, okay, now if you hear something in the roof, that's a house rat or black rat. So if you hear rats in the roof, the first thing you look for, do I have trees, creepers, shrubs, anything against my house? Are there branches lying on the roof? That is how they access up and down, up and down, up and down into your roof. So you cut them away. Then you have a look, how much growth have I got around my house? Because the first thing is, once you've done all of that and you've opened it up, you've got to make it difficult for them. The whole game is making it difficult. Then you need to know what they're feeding on. Now, it might be that your dogs don't finish all their food, because dog pellets are extremely good rat food. And it might be that your waste bin is not, your waste is not in seal bin. You leave a black bag lying outside. They learn quickly how to get out of that. Then also fruit, vegetables, etc., etc. They can all be a cause. So what you do is you go around until you've virtually eliminated all things. Then you get really sneaky with your trapping, because rats are very clever. We all know that. But believe it or not, I have not trapped hundreds of rats. I've trapped thousands of rats the whole time. And the secret to successfully trapping them is to modify your approach. So one time you'll use apple, right? Apple will work like a charm. If your trap isn't working with apple, put in chicken bone. If it doesn't work with chicken bone, try something else. Now, there's a funny thing. Much as we all like to believe, and sometimes I think the Europeans are as bad, that the Chinese are out plundering everything. Our Chinese shops sell, and funny enough, believe it or not, there's a lot of good environmentally sound products to use in the Chinese shops. And they do sell a lot of these walk-in traps. It's a wire walk-in trap. And that little old lady that I told you about that was putting poison out, that killed that owl and then reformed the ways, that is what she uses, just those wire walk-in traps. And they are just so successful. It is amazing. And I catch hundreds of rats in them. But the whole time I look at things like, I've developed a method, because one of the big poisons, initially I thought to myself, okay, well, what's going to happen is owls are going to be safe in the rural areas. You know, the town people will wipe them out, but it's not like that. We get so many poison birds in from the rural areas. Why? Rural people keep horses, they keep chickens, and that brings rats. So one of the principles that I developed was a principle of creating a secluded, safe place for rats. So I create this really, really safe hideout for them. I use bales, I pack it up, I even cover them over nicely, and then I sit and I watch. So what happens is, you know that old adage, if it sounds too good to be true, it is too good to be true. Sometimes the rats don't realize that. I let them settle in nicely. Once I've got a nice colony going, I just close the whole area in, toss in 3 Jack Russell, take the bales out, end of my rat problem. Works like a charm. And you sort the whole colony out in one shot like that. But that's not the only way I do it. I'm very successful with trapping. That old lady is extremely successful. It's about the bait you use and where you set it. And once you've caught, don't leave your trap lying there. Take it away a bit. Put it somewhere else. But like I said, bird feeders are the worst culprits in the urban environment for bringing rats in. And once they're there, they're in the roof, they've got a good access for food, and they thrive. And the funny thing is, the majority of people who actually listen to what I tell them and stop the bird feeding, within 2 months, they tell me the rat problem stops. So you need to look at your whole area. There is something there that you're not picking up on that is encouraging and providing food for them in that. And it can be as simple as an access point. It can be a gutter pipe going in. And then one of the other tricks I tell people is, during daylight, climb into your roof, have a look around, see where the entry points, because you'll see the light shining through. Go to the outside, take a bit of, what is this, steel wool, and some of that foam, block those holes up, put steel wool and foam in. The whole game to controlling rats is to make life difficult for them. The more difficult you make for them, they go and find easier pickings. Just like criminals, if there's good security, they go find somewhere else.
Yeah, I'm going to try the apple. I was using peanut butter to try and trap them.
Listen, in my conservation days, we were taught 2 things, and I bet you they still teach the kids the same thing: peanut butter and oats. Peanut butter and oats. Let me tell you one thing, I went away from that for years. So if you ask me about my rodent experience, one of the things that I actually do is bubonic plague monitoring. So I collect rodent sample and that indigenous rodent samples, and I do that as part of the work that I do. And then those samples are analyzed by the NICD. I picked up plague, I think, about 3 times so far. And it's actually very, very active at the moment, directly linked to drought and that. And I saw the guys talking about the islands and tossing rodenticide. I tell you, if there was no mammals on the island you want to save, the way to do it is just put bubonic plague down. Not dangerous to humans, not as dangerous as it used to be. Basic antibiotics will sort it out. You just put them down, you let those rodents get the plague. In the areas that I work in 2-3 weeks, it cleans out every single living rodent, and they stay gone sometimes for 2 years before they come back again. So, and the thing is with plague is you need an intermediate host, and if you don't have those intermediate hosts, in other words, you've only got rats on the island, you introduce plague and kept off the island for 2 years, it would disappear totally, the plague itself, because there's no intermediate host for the fleas. So you would solve your rat problem on those islands, all of those rats would die. And if you had other mammals like stoats, weasels, whatever on the islands, they would also die as well. So it is interesting looking at things from a different perspective, and particularly when I think about the islands where there are birds and only rats, that would be one way of resolving your rat problem. And I mean, practically, I'm a person who works with that almost every single day, and I've seen the effect of plague on indigenous rodents, and it is frightening. It just cleans them out in weeks, they're all gone. And like I said, I think that...
Sorry, would that work on mice as well? Because I mean, they
yes,
bird life have got the whole thing on mouse-free Marion, and they're spending millions and whatever, exactly what you're talking about.
Well,
so
I can tell you now,
I guess we chatted to them.
Sorry, if I could, I would say bubonic plague is the answer. And people go, oh, the plague. The plague was a problem when you didn't have all the antibiotics we have. Today, it's easily treatable with antibiotic. I mean, I do plague sampling every single month. I've done it for the last 15 years. And I mean, as I say, I've got 3 or 4 positive samples. Very difficult to get positive samples because you've got a very short window period to get them in. But I mean, I've watched the effect on indigenous rodent populations, and it is awesome. It just cleans them out for years. Nothing comes back. We still don't know what the intermediate hosts are. People suggested cats. It seems like cats die from the plague. At the moment, the greatest crisis facing us is rabies. Rabies could be an answer for cats as well. So, you know, there are a lot of alternate ways, and unfortunately, people don't think like that. They just look at a chemical solution. There are a lot of natural solutions lying out there that we can actually control and that we can use to combat things like this, without tossing that endless stream of poison that ends up in the whole ecosystem.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marty. Dr. Ravensburg has got his hand raised and has been for a while, so I'm going to ask you to unmute.
I did not have a question, but I just wanted to mention something that hadn't been mentioned yet about those poisons. So that there's been a lot of studies done, especially in America, where they find these rat poisons throughout the food chain, which clearly indicates that these molecules are very hardy molecules, and they don't break down easily, and that allows them to move up the food chain. They even found these poisons out at sea and going into sea life. And interestingly, even they found it in humans and even in mother's milk. So, you know, we are not immune from this poisoning of the environment at all. You know, it stays in the environment, and sooner or later it comes back to ourselves as well. And you know, these poisons have been made to kill rats quickly, which they do, but the long-term effects of small amounts of poison, that is only now getting more clear, like suppression of the immune system and neurological signs. You know, we don't really know what small amounts do in the long run, but you know, there's definitely a lot going on there. I did not want to leave that unmentioned.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ravensburg. Richard Matsabedi, welcome back. I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you, and thanks to Arnold for the remarkable work that he's doing. Yeah, it's amazing that he commits so much time to saving the raptors. So I wanted to ask whether he can recommend or is looked into the use of repellents, you know, because the scale of the problem is big, and maybe nowadays we use biodiversity to control biodiversity. especially nuisance species. Have you considered using biorepellents? For example, scents or products from scents of cats and, predators of rats that could be put in the roof to exclude them from our homes. That could be another solution. I don't know, but what are your thoughts? Thank you.
Okay, so I'm very wary of a lot of these repellents and that, because again, having tested a lot of them, now there's a very interesting product that's allegedly repels snakes, for argument's sake. And I've tried that as an experiment because it costs a lot of money, and a lot of my clients and that approached me and said, do I really believe that this product works? So I said, well, let's try it. And there's no ways it even works. However, there's a very interesting product produced by Molly called Marder spray. Now, in Europe, particularly in Germany, and that the pine martens in the winter climb in the warm engines and they do damage to the wiring and that. And Marder spray is a repellent, a non-toxic repellent that they spray on the wiring and that. Now, I've tried it with great success on house mice and that, inducting and cabling and that. So that does seem to work. But the problem is the financial cost involved. However, there are a lot of theories on products like mint, peppermint and that. Evidently, rodents don't like that really strong smelling stuff, and they keep away if there's mint products like that used. I haven't personally tried it. What I have experimented with is a lot of the cellulose-based products, where basically what happens is that because of the size of the digestive system and the gut and that of rodents, evidently they will suffer from constipation if they eat certain products. There's also been a lot of talk about bicarbonate of soda being particularly dangerous to rodents. So there's a lot of things out there, and every time I look, there's something new, but I am wary of some of these products because everyone wants to sell something, and one of the big appealing factors is always, but it's eco-friendly. So I try and test everything and look at it. Marder spray I found definitely works with house mice, inducting and that, and it's far safer than anything else if you're going to use ducting. But rats and that are very, very pervasive, and they live in some of the worst possible environments, surrounded by chemicals, and they carry on. There's also been a lot of stuff with these ultrasonic sounds and that. I don't find they work at all, not at all.
Great, thank you, Arnold. I just wanted to touch on that that Molly spray that you were talking about. How long does it last for if you would spray it into your ducts or onto your wiring?
Okay, that's a very interesting point, and this is where there's good potential. If you can imagine that it can last for a month inside the heat of a car's engine, imagine how long it'll last in a relatively cool space like ducting and that. So I have been experimenting with it. I found the longest in the stadium we used it because a lot of the computer cabling runs in ducting, and you get the odd house mouse problem, or house mouse gets inside and they chew on the cabling and that. And I've used it there, and I found it effective for almost 2 years in the ducting.
Great, thank you, Arnold. Elizabeth Mockford, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Good evening. Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. We have a number of piggeries, and as you can imagine, obviously there's plenty of food for rats there. What would you recommend? We obviously can't remove the food.
I'm going to recommend my nasty little trick of the bales. What I did, I was explaining earlier, is get yourself a nice dark corner in the piggery. Get a whole pile of bales set up there, right? Make it nice, dark, and comfortable so that every rat inside of that piggery says, this is the place I want to be. I've had amazing success. I can tell you now, I've had really, really amazing success. And it happened by accident, if I must be honest. I don't want to pretend any genius on that. It's actually my archery butts. And I've set up my nice archery butts, and I was shooting into the archery butts. And then the bloody rats were moving in. So after a while, I thought, if they like these archery butts, so surely if I set up a few nice dark corners with bales and stuff, and it works like a charm. Immediately I have the slightest sign of a rat problem in the corner of the garden, up come the bales, I cover everything over nicely, keep an eye, I see, okay, their branches going in, they've settled in nicely, close the area nicely off, throw the terriers in, pick up the bales, end of the rat problem. And I'm telling you now, honestly, I think your piggeries, try that. In some of the warehouses, I experimented using Parrot nest boxes. That also works like a charm. So they love anything nice and dark, and particularly with house rats, which are the main problem rats and probably your problem. If you hang the Parrot nest boxes up high, put nice grass and everything in it, right? Then what you'll find is that the rats will go in, they'll settle in there, and you can actually just close the hole and take the box outside and destroy them. So yeah, the big thing is, I just want to remind people, I know there are a lot of people that are very sensitive to things being killed in that. House rats, brown rats, house mice are invasive species. They are not to be taken and released in the veld. The damage those birds cause to bird life is frightening. I can show you photographs of nests full of birds where the rats actually cart the birds that they kill into the nest. So there is no ways, and I've warned people before, it's actually illegal to take species like house rats, catch them in a trap and go and release them in the veld. But in your situation, I'm telling you, try my bale trick, because I've seen how effective it is. And if you've got those big piggeries, all you want is a nice, quiet, dark corner, stack the bales up nicely, cover it over so it's nicer, and don't interfere with it. And you'll see sooner or later, you'll see the branches and stuff going in, leave it. The other thing that I do that is extremely successful as well is I make a feeding place for them. And then I use a multi-catch trap. Now, there was a Zimbabwean guy, and I don't know how he managed it. He's been better than I ever have been, but he used to catch 20 or 30 rats a night in a multi-catch trap. And the multi-catch traps were made by a guy. So if someone wants to PM me, I'll send you photographs. They were made by a guy in the Free State. And basically what I do is I put out a bowl of laying mash. The rats come for about a week feeding in the laying mash, and then I transfer that bowl into a big multi-catch trap. And once they're in, you catch a nice group of them, take it away. Don't put it straight back again because they're going to be wary. Leave it for a couple of days and then start again. But my bale story in your piggery, I'm telling you, that will work fantastically. I'm really certain of that. After what I've seen, how well it works, they love it. The bales are warm, particularly in the winter. They're looking for those nice, warm, cozy places to nest in. You just lure them in and you'll be shocked at how many live in amongst those bales very quickly.
Unfortunately, there are a huge number of nice warm places in the piggery and nice dark places in the piggery down, the sort of...
Try it. I'm telling you, in a dark corner.
Certainly
you
worth trying.
You want to bring those numbers down. That's the one thing, your multi-catch trap. And then the other thing is your piggery totally sealed off, or is it open?
Well, no, it's open. No, pretty much open.
So owls can come in and hunt.
No, not that kind of open. Certainly open to rats and things like that. There used to be owls around. Unfortunately, as you say, a lot of owls have disappeared over time. And if we could actually put a few barn owls inside, that would possibly be helpful. But I don't think that the owls would enjoy that.
You'll be quite surprised. Barn owls, out of all of them, in fact, I regard barn owls as the rats of the owl world, because if you see where barn owls go in, it's just amazing. They're like little rats scurrying around, and they love those dark. They would actually do reasonably well, particularly if it's big piggeries and it's quiet and dark, they would thrive there. And out of all of your owls and that, because barn owls are capable of breeding the whole year round if they have enough food, they would really hammer the rat population. Eagle owls are very, they'll take birds, they'll take rats, they'll take insects, they'll take a whole, but barn owls are just specialist rat and mice hunters. And, I've done a lot of prey remains and that with barn owls and that, and they actually are capable of catching house rats that weigh almost the same as they do. So they are the most ferocious, and with a piggery in that, I would say you need to make a plan to get barn owls in there. Definitely in that kind of situation. But my bale story, try it. I promise you, it works very, very well.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Elizabeth. Okay, Arnold, I've got a couple of questions, and maybe Cheryl Ogilvie can actually come on as well and just confirm whether she's still, or whether TUT is still teaching in their nature conservation classes syrup, oats, and peanut butter to trap rats with. But her question was: is DDT DDT is sprayed in protected areas? How do you stop this? The red tape is enormous. So I remember when I worked for national parks, a couple of times we had to take all the pictures off the walls in our houses for the walls to be sprayed with DDT.
Yeah,
Okay,
just yeah, sorry. For many years, I have noticed that they are spraying in protected areas. They're also going into schools and spraying the walls. And you know, there's hardly any water out there, so the children can't even wash their hands before they eat. So they are consuming DDT. And I don't have proof, but there is a lot of issues with pertaining to children with droopy eyelids, born with shortened limbs and things like that. They go into the community homesteads. They don't even ask. The lady could be sitting under a tree on a grass mat, and they just go in and they spray inside her one little roomed hut. They spray the walls, they spray the floors. Yeah, it's a little bit scary that DDT can be so easily used. And what are the consequences and how can we stop this? Because I know it's not only affecting the human race, but it's also affecting biodiversity. And yes, Alistair, we used to train that way, where we did jungle oats and peanut butter and Sherman traps to do our small mammal research projects. And yes, we did have a lot of success using peanut butter and jungle oats, but yes, that was a while back. So I don't know, Arnold, over to you.
Yeah, that's fond memory, Sherman traps. I wonder what a Sherman trap costs today. Those were brilliant little traps. Absolutely brilliant. That's very fond memories. Listen, just as a matter of interest, those traps the Chinese shop sell for, they're 60 Rand. And I bait them with chicken, the head of a nice, you know, that gristle on the end of a chicken bone. And let me tell you, I catch an amazing variety of rodents in those traps. That's my standard for plague monitoring, actually. So aside from that,
polony, by the way, they go for polony.
I'll try that. Listen, I'm going to try anything. The peanut butter and jungle oats started out a long time with me, and I catch on that. I catch quite a few shrews as well. Lots of different shrews come into the traps of that. Okay, so get back to the DDT thing. We are sitting with a problem, and the problem is very honestly there are people that obviously are directly related to the whole pharmaceutical and the chemical companies, and these people endorse and give their endorsements, etc., etc. And one of the most amazing endorsements, very much along the line that you're talking about now, was they were not crop spraying, they were spraying marijuana plantations in the Transkei with Roundup. They were aerial spraying it, and they were going right over the villages, spraying the children, the adults working below in the fields, everything. And a well-known scientist said, no, but that stuff's harmless. I've worked in the fields with it forever. If it really made people sick, I'd be sick as well. You know, there's no such thing as that, etc., etc. But of course, the article did point out that he did receive his funding 4 companies back. You know, so the biggest problem with this kind of stuff is who's endorsing it. There has to be someone endorsing it. Now, I heard the most frightening thing the other day. Someone said to me there was a meeting in the Western Cape and they were discussing exotic species, and problem species, and one of the species that came up were crows and ravens. And they said these were a major problem. And what is the answer you think they came up with? Just put out poison. So, you know, we are so indoctrinated into that belief. But to fight these things, you need to find out who's endorsing that. Someone is endorsing that. Someone has given the go-ahead and say, okay, use the stuff, it's harmless, not going to harm you. And that is the only way you stop that, by directly going for someone who authorizes or endorses or whatever. You're not going to stop it any other way, because they will just continue doing it in that same moronic fashion, going and spraying everywhere, etc. What are they spraying DDT for? As a matter of interest, for what?
Malaria, because it's a red zone.
You know, I told you it was just so interesting that in the 1950s, Transnet put up these massive bat houses all over that area there along their stations and that in the malaria areas to control mosquitoes. Just absolutely fascinating. In the 50s, a relatively archaic organization like Transnet decided, well, we need to do something, and they put up bat boxes. Didn't spray DDT or anything, put up bat boxes. And we all know the amazing amount of mosquitoes. Sorry, I'm going to tell you a little story, but there's so many stories that happen. But on that line, I got a phone call from a woman one day, a woman from Transvaal, came down to our town, and she was complaining about bats in her roof. So I said to her, listen, lady, do you know how many mosquitoes a bat eats? Those house bats and that. Anyway, I gave her all the stats and the figures and that, and she went away, and I thought, oh, well, she's probably going to have those bats poisoned, etc., etc. 2 years later, I get a phone call from the same woman. She says, listen, they're painting the roof, and I'm worried they're going to disturb my bats. So I said, going to disturb your bats? She said, yes, they're going to disturb my bats. So I said, why are you worried about it? She said, no, well, you know, our neighbors next door, they go to sleep with their windows closed all night long. She said, we sleep with the windows open. So it is interesting, but it's just very sad. The problem is that there are so many people on the payrolls of these giant pharmaceutical companies. They just rubber stamp and go right over the top of everything. It's the same thing with eco-friendly and bat poisons. You know, they just go right over the top of you. But if you want to do something about it, you need to find out who's authorizing it. That's the problem.
Thank you. Thank you.
That's the only way to start. You know, tackling a guy who comes and sprays not going to mean a thing, but you need to find out who's authorized that and from where, which will be extremely interesting.
Yeah, every homesteader's got a plastic bottle outside their house, and it gets filled in every time these guys come by, and they just sign it and stamp it, and they've sprayed the house and they move on. I mean, but they don't ask, they just do it. So I'll do a little bit of my own investigation out there.
Yeah, you must find out who is authorizing.
I'd also just like to, Liz Sprague asked a question, what is the effect of vitamin D3?
Did you see that thing I put there? And this is what blows my mind. Also, an eco-friendly product. Go and have a look how toxic vitamin D is. There's no antidote for it. It's a pity Dr. Matt's left. He will tell you there's no antidote. If a dog or a cat gets poisoned by it, there is no antidote. Nothing. I got an African goshawk in 3 years ago we identified as being poisoned by that exact same poison. That bird died. There was nothing you can do. Nothing you can do to save. There is no antidote for an overdose of vitamin D3. So chlorociferol, you will find it there. You can go and have a look. In fact, I had a major argument. There we go. Dr. Matt's back. Ask him about vitamin D3. He'll tell you.
Well, I'm not sure how popular it is as an anti-rodent. I don't think we see it that much, but it affects the calcium metabolism of the animal, and then obviously they die. So, but yeah, and like Arnold said, we can't, you know, if an animal would have it, then there's not much we can do about it. But I'm not so familiar with it, in all honesty. But
what about D3?
So that is just one of them. So the vitamin D comes in lots of different metabolites. You know, this the body uses it in many different ways, and it is being modified. So that is just one of the metabolites, I think, of vitamin D. So it seems natural for being a vitamin, but obviously it is made to kill. So, but yeah, I would be wary of anything that is toxic. You know, you can't have the best of both worlds. You can't have something that is toxic to one animal and then not have any other side effects. It just doesn't work that way.
Has an effect on humans?
No doubt. If your child will swallow that, then you know it will potentially be very dangerous. It's the same as the snail base that they sell in the shop, on which there is no warning for people. It just says don't eat or drink while using it. But if you swallow that, you will die. Maybe we've seen enough dogs and all of that get acute liver failure from it. So, and it stands to reason. There are poisons, and you know they will poison whoever eats it.
Blaine, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, I was wondering about the effects of the pesticides that they use in, sorry, I'm not too sure the names of the actual pesticides, but the pesticides that they use in edge clearing and such, especially in like the Western Cape and the wetlands and stuff like that. Would that have an effect on rare species like black Harriers and such?
Okay, so those would be herbicides. Arnold, what would
Yeah.
the effective herbicides be on Harriers and sort of birds utilizing wetlands?
Any of those pesticides has an effect. It doesn't matter what it is. And, you have to look at it. Roundup, glyphosate, that's a herbicide, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay, so what effect does it have on humans? We've seen how many civil suits have come out in the States. In fact, I think companies have been sold because of the sheer amount of civil lawsuits coming out. And people have to wander around the field spraying Roundup, dressed in hazmat suits, but we spray the same stuff into wetlands and areas where birds and that occur. It's got to affect them. There's no ways it won't affect. I mean, Dr. Matt can maybe answer better, but I mean, herbicides have to affect all life around them. Not only birds, insects too.
yes.
Yes, again, I can't really give a full answer to that because that is just not something I know much about. But there's definitely more and more evidence appearing that herbicides used in America and Europe on big scales, and also in South Africa, that are affecting birds in ways that we do not expect. And it has been shown that it is messing with their ability to migrate, for example, that birds cannot migrate quite as well because they're that part of the brain that they use to coordinate is being affected by herbicides, even in very small quantities that they can lead to toxicity. So the birds might not necessarily drop down immediately, but it does mess them up in other ways that we did not expect or could foresee. So yeah, and all these products, they're all slightly different, and who has really investigated all these products into those fine details? It is only after decades of use that we were starting to see the effects of that. So yeah, no easy answer to that, but probably not good.
Sorry, if I can add to that, there's just so much information I have at hand. But one of the fascinating things is, do you know that songbirds in Europe have 35 different pesticides in their systems? I mean, that's frightening. Do you know that in the average European country, if you go and buy a single fruit off the shelf, it has no less than 7 different pesticides on it? That is frightening. And I mean, that's the world we live in.
And in Europe, at least there are, to a large degree, that they are now regulating all those pesticides. But South Africa is known to be one of the countries where a lot of pesticides that are labeled as toxic or highly toxic or moderately toxic to people are still in use in our country. We use a lot more pesticides, and we are allowed to use a lot more pesticides than European countries.
I just also want to add to that in the chat, Blaine. Justine has put something in. Roundup is made by Monsanto, and the book Seed Money goes into your question in quite a lot of depth. And there's also a link to Spotify for you to go and look at. Okay, the next question is.
Cool. Oh, thank you.
Cool. Okay, the next question is, or it's not really a question, it's more a statement from Barent Christoffel Janssen van Rensburg. He says a lot of people are increasingly using a type of glue that is reportedly quite effective. That glue, I think, Arnold, you touched on in your presentation, you referred to it as a grease.
Okay, I think we're talking about two different things here. I'm talking about a poison grease. I think he's talking about glue boards. It's a very, very sticky glue that the rodent gets stuck to. Obviously, there are cruelty factors involved in that. I have mixed feelings on it because I know the damage caused by rodenticides and poisons. But the point of the matter is that the glue per se is a glue that they put wherever the rodents walk, and they get stuck on it and they can't get off. They also use it for control of house geckos and that, but it is by nature cruel. The poison grease is a total different thing. What the guys do is sometimes they make it up themselves. It's literally a very, very light grease, which they then put poison into, and that they paint all over the place. The rodents walk on it, as I said, gets onto the fur, they lick themselves clean. In fact, the frightening thing, a lot of these pest control companies tend to ignore is that those same rodents then walk over a whole lot of food stuff in the shop. And I've often seen on like bottles of, you can actually see the smear where the rodent's gone over the top from the grease. So yeah, it is very, very interesting.
Cool. So there is certainly a cruelty factor there. And then Christine Wagner from TUT, there's a shop near her house that uses a lot of poison, and one day a poisoned mouse slowly walked past her in the shop. What can she give them as a solution, as an alternative to poison?
You're not going to like what I say, they're not going to like what I say, but clean your act up. House mice in particular are directly a failure in sanitation. If you have a house mouse problem, house mice are so territorial, they live in a tiny, tiny area, a couple of square meters. If you have a house mouse problem, your sanitation is no good. Forget it. There's no excuse. House rats, I can still take a bit of an excuse because your forage distance is 1.5 kilometers for a male, 800 meters for a female. So they can forage quite a way around you. But a house mouse in your house means exactly in that area, you are not maintaining a decent standard of hygiene.
Arnold, there's another question here from Liz, again, asking, how can one safely dispose of poisons such as eco-rat?
Well, those poisons, the way to do it is actually to take it into one of these waste disposal companies that incinerates everything. That's the right way to dispose of poison. You know, you throw it in a black bag, ends up on the tip. What do you think happens? It's taken out and used to poison dogs, etc., etc. So, no, the only way to dispose, take it to a proper waste disposal company. If it was PE, I could tell you exactly where to go. You know, that just incinerate everything.
Nolene has her hand raised.
Okay.
Yes, please. Thank you so much for the talk. To not use poison, how do I control ants? What kind of birds can I attract to my garden to eat the ants?
You know, there's a very interesting natural product, and it's called the Atomaceous earth. The weirdest thing is I'm always wary of these kind of things. And I thought, oh, mumbo jumbo. And I tried it. Let me tell you, if you don't want a roach in your kitchen, just take the Atomaceous earth and put it behind your fridge or under your microwave, whatever. A couple of days time, you'll find a whole lot of dead roaches. Totally non-toxic. The interesting thing is it's mined somewhere in the center of the country. You can eat it. Your dogs can eat it. In fact, it's good. You can give it to your birds. They're putting it in feed and everything. But the design of the molecule is such that it actually suffocates insects. And it really is an amazing product. So I would definitely get the Atomaceous earth. It's totally non-toxic. You can lick it up yourself if you so choose, because it's full of the most amazing minerals and stuff. I've often eaten it just for the joy of it. And, well, there's a thing from Cheryl Ogilvie as well. But, yeah, I definitely, sorry about the insect thing, try the Atomaceous earth. It's an awesome, awesome natural product. And it can harm nothing other than an insect.
Thank you so much.
Where would one get diatomaceous earth?
It's freely available at agricultural co-ops and everywhere.
Can you please spell this earth?
Listen, it gets me by the short and curlies as well. Diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth.
Okay, I hope that answers your question, Sybil. I was also going to ask that question as well, because I was a bit concerned about the spelling. Thank you very much, Arnold, for a fantastic presentation, and thank you, Dr. Ravensberg, for your contributions as well this evening. And thank you everybody that has joined us and had some brilliant questions and contributed to the general talk this evening. I think it's been a fantastic talk, incredibly enlightening and incredibly educational. Frightening, and we certainly do have a lot of work that we need to do going forward. But I think that we've converted a lot of people in this talk this evening.